Yeah, hey, welcome everybody to week one recaps for the NFFL Today. I'm your host, Dan Green, coming to you live from the NFFL Today studios in beautiful, not so sunny Warren, Ohio. So, hey, welcome back. It's 2011. We're still here. It's dress down day today at the NFFL Today studios. So, we're recognizing that with some vigor. And, promise to bring you all the up-to-date news, notes, and little tidbits on the league, things that are going on in the games that were, some things to look at in the games that are to be. For those of you who don't remember last year, or if you're new to the league, the way we do this, my pledge to you is to come out every week, barring some unforeseen circumstance, and give you the recaps. Talk about the games, talk about what's going on, give you some of my opinions, and they're just that. And judging by my performance in week one and my sub 500 record last year, you could take that stuff for what it is. But I'm just going to do my best to keep you guys informed on what's going on. I like feedback. So, put it on the message board, email me, text me, call the cell phone, whatever you got. I really would appreciate it. If there's certain things you want me to talk about, to cover, if you feel like I'm missing something, believe me, I welcome it. So, we'll get right into it. Now, keep in mind, the way we do these games, there's no, we don't pick who we're going to go over first. It's not based on favoritism or anything like that. It's simply based on results. Top scoring team that wins is going to be recognized by having their game talked about first. And it'll go on through. The lowest scoring winner is going to have their game talked about last. It's always been that way. It's been that way since the commissioner was hand typing up the recaps. And we've been doing it the same way for the last 10 years. Year number 11 of our vaunted league. And again, we're glad all of you are here. Appreciate those that have been here from the start, and appreciate those that are here, more recently, and everybody being so very competitive. I think last year was a real telling stat. We had a few teams, at least one team under 500 make the playoffs last year. Teams are battling. You look at the stats, we had, I think, 8 out of 10 score over 1,000 points on the season last year in 12 games. That's not necessarily real mind-blowing, but still, it shows competitiveness across the board. If you look at the fact that we don't have teams starting injured guys, we don't have guys making stupid drops of players, we don't have guys or girls not making waiver wire selections when they really should. It's a very competitive league, one that I'm very proud to be in, and I look forward to another 10 years plus in the NFFL. So again, I'm Dan, owner of the Danimals Cannibals, as you know, and been some other team names over the year. I got some other nicknames that you probably call me on the message board or under your breath when you're watching games on Sunday. But here I am now going over these games with you. So we'll start off right away. We'll get into game one here. Buffalo Bills, the league's new number one ranked team after 1 week, as the preseason rankings were shuffled up significantly. Top two guys in the preseason, Lightning and the Cannibals, find themselves now at the bottom of the league as far as the rankings go. So we had Buffalo take on Silver Bullets in week one. Buffalo came out on top a little bit, 158-65, and a very impressive showing from that Buffalo roster. Cool thing about it for him is he doesn't get the game he wants out of Gates, he doesn't get the game he wants out of Matt Schaub, and he still puts up 158. So the rest of us should be real concerned, as last season's top regular season scoring team with over 1,300 points for those 12 games, Buffalo continues his trend of hot fantasy ownership. So he's 1-0 right now. Again, during the game he had, just to give you some, I don't know where to start, but we'll look at number one scorer for his team, Wes Welker, that Monday night game against the Dolphins. 8 catches for $160, couple of touchdowns, one of which got him some mega bonus points as it was 99 yards long. Haven't seen one of those since, it's been a while, since the days of Tecmo Bowl. But that's what Wes Welker is going to do, apparently, against a real weak Miami defense. Very surprising, in fact. We had those two guys, or at least that one corner, I forget his name, Davis is his last name, the Miami cornerback that was on record stating that he and the guy that plays across the field from him were the two best corners in the league over top of Revis and Cromartie in New York. So he's going to have to watch some tape of that game and kind of reassess his position on that, because apparently right now, if you've got guys going against Miami in the passing game, you want to get them in your starting lineup. Again, that was Wes Welker putting up 39. We had Ray Rice coming out of the gate strong against a typically tough run defense in Pittsburgh. 107 yards rushing, 42 through the air, a touchdown either way. He ends up scoring 31. After that, you had Reggie Wayne in junk stats time coming up with his 100 yards and a touchdown against Houston. That game was never really close at 34-7 rout. The Colts are going to have a tough time without Manning, but apparently Wayne is going to be the new age Anquan Bolden, as far as if you can think back to when Bolden was a rookie see with Arizona what he was doing for junk stats. And I think Buffalo had that guy too. So Buffalo is the master of getting that junk stats guy, which is great for fantasy. So those were his top three: Welker, Rice, and Wayne. He did still put up 19 with the Eagles defense, who scored a touchdown, and Mike Turner put up his 100 yards and a fumble against that Chicago Bears defense. So he's in good shape right now going forward, with Schaub and Gates taking the week off and still scoring $158. So those of us that are facing him are going to have to, pay real close attention. For the Silver Bullets, it just never got going, unfortunately. 65 points was all he could muster. Top scorer was the Ravens D with 24, which is nice to see. That Ravens D looked very impressive against Pittsburgh. Again, Pittsburgh being a team that typically is going to put up some numbers against any defense, be it running or throwing. For the Ravens to do what they did, albeit it was in Baltimore, but still super impressive. 7 turnovers, 4 sacks. That's a lot of fantasy points right there. So if he can keep that kind of production from the Ravens D, Tom and the Silver Bullets are going to be tough to beat also when these other guys get going. Greg Jennings had a great game. Not great game, but he was on pace for a great game with 89 yards and a touchdown, most of which was in the first few drives of that game on Thursday night. And it's a little bit misleading because the Packers, if you watch that one, they really took their foot off the gas pedal in that game. They were really on fire at the beginning, kind of built up that lead, and were content to kind of sit back and play, we don't want to lose mode or whatever, and they damn near did lose it with Drew Brees coming back big at the end. But Jennings looks poised to have a big year. The running backs, D'Angelo Williams, Chris Johnson combined for 7 points. That's not going to continue, especially not from Chris Johnson, who, again, no preseason. Consider those maybe some reps for him in that first game. He's going to get back on track in a big way. He's got a tough matchup in Baltimore we just got done talking about, so it's going to be tough, maybe a tough start, but it is Chris Johnson, and I think you'll have a hard time sitting him down against anybody in fantasy football this year, with him being healthy and just being who he is, Chris Johnson. And Hasselbeck, frankly, looked good. He looked like he could get the job done through the air for Tennessee, so it's not going to be what we feared maybe in terms of so much pressure on the running game because Tennessee not having a quarterback. I mean, Hasselbeck is serviceable, maybe even a little bit better than serviceable. So that was Silver Bullets breakdown. For next week now, Buffalo, going back to Buffalo, he's undefeated obviously after one game. He's got Voodoo in the second week. Voodoo coming off kind of an ugly win in the first week, scoring under 100 points but still getting the victory. So we got a battle of undefeated teams. You want to get, and I know Buffalo's mindset is to get a stranglehold on that Great Lakes division early, get that 2-0, and kind of lock himself in up at the top of the division, maybe get a little bit of wiggle room for bye weeks and stuff and injuries and things of that nature. For him next week, it looks like just an embarrassment of riches at quarterback. I don't know who he's going to start. He's got Stafford playing against KC. He's got Grossman playing against, Arizona. We saw what Arizona made Cam Newton look like. Steve Young or somebody else. Matt Schaub going against Miami. We just got done talking about the Miami team. What do you do there? I don't know. You got to put names in a hat and make a selection, I guess. You got Mike Turner playing against Philadelphia. Again, that doesn't sound, maybe if you just say it, doesn't sound great, but Mike Turner ran well against the Bears. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do. Steven Jackson last week against Philadelphia, gashing that defense on the first couple of runs he had. Unfortunately, Steven Jackson decided early this year to be Steven Jackson and have to leave a game with some type of a leg injury after a 40-plus yard touchdown run and then a 9-yard carry on the next possession. If he stays in the game, he probably goes bananas in that one as well. So there was some running space against Philly last week for the Rams, and I would anticipate a little bit more of the same for Mike Turner there as Atlanta takes on Philadelphia. We talked about Ray Rice already. He's in top form. He's going against Tennessee. Shouldn't be much of a problem as Jacksonville moved the ball with ease with both of their running backs last week. Reggie Wayne, I don't know, again, hard to say anything with the Colts right now in the passing game or anything offensively with the Colts is kind of an up-in-the-air deal. But again, like I said, junk stats being maybe the key thing. You might have to sit around and wait for a little while for Wayne to get going. But anytime the Colts are playing without Manning, you got a real good chance of that score getting out of hand. It is Cleveland, though, so that might be a dogfight. Who knows? You got Gates going against it escapes me at the moment who San Diego's playing this upcoming game here. But Gates, New England. Oh, my goodness. Now listen to this one. Gates against Minnesota. He's got 8 catches for 74 yards. That cat was targeted 13 times in that game. That's more than most of the leading receivers in the league. So Gates is poised to explode. New England gave up nearly 400 yards passing to Miami on Monday night. what more can I say? Gates is looking to be up for double digits easily. Probably a multiple touchdown game for Gates this week coming up. So that's what we got going on right now in that particular matchup. For Silver Bullets next week, it's a battle against the Killer Whales, one of his arch rivals. That's a rematch of the last couple of title games. 2 years ago, it was the Whales beating them out for the title. Last year, Silver Bullets got Whales for the title. So this is becoming a really intriguing matchup in our league. Tom's looking at Cedric Benson, who ran roughshod over Cleveland last week. He's playing against Denver. You guys saw what the Raiders were able to do. Greg Jennings, we talked about earlier, his prowess in the game Thursday. He's playing Carolina. Again, Arizona went all through the air, laser light show style on Carolina, so Jennings is looking hot. The Kenny Britt versus Baltimore matchup is a little bit questionable at the moment. The Macklin versus Atlanta, again, I think you got to keep an eye on that because Macklin, again, missing all the time. Again, no offseason for anybody, so everybody loses that. But then Macklin loses the entire preseason, post-lockout stuff because of the sickness. He's just getting back on the field. He's physically okay, but he's not mentally there yet. Over time, I think that comes back, and you're going to find that Macklin's a good play this week against Atlanta. That's just my opinion. I don't like anything against Baltimore if you can avoid it. Owen Daniels playing against Minnesota. Again, we talked about what Gates did last week, so you got to feel a little bit excited about what Schaub to Daniels could look like. And then we got that Ravens defense, of course, who's very ready to go against. Really doesn't matter who you put out there, I don't think. So that was the first game we're going to look at there, Silver Bullets and Buffalo. After that, it was surprising point output from Linda and that Rattler squad as they took on the preseason ranked #1 Danimals Cannibals in a game that, again, wasn't even close, 135-65 drubbing of Danimals Cannibals. For Linda, the points mostly, and we're talking more than a third of them actually, came from Tom Brady. Of that 135, Brady accounts for 53 in the unbelievable joke of a game that was the Monday Nighter where he goes for 517 yards, 4 touchdowns, managed to throw a pick, thankfully kept them under 55. So anyway, 53 points from Brady, 32 from Shady McCoy, who, if you watch that game, was held in check for a lot of it. And then all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter, he breaks loose on a couple of nice runs. That one draw play accounted for, oh my gosh, I forget how many yards, 49 yards in just one play. So of his 122, almost half of it comes on one carry. And that's the way football is. You can sit there all day rooting against the guy to not go off on you, and then in the fourth quarter, when it matters most, one handoff, one run, one touchdown, some bonus points, see you later. He scores 32. Those are the two big producers for Linda. Dwayne Bowe is probably the biggest letdown, as that whole entire Chiefs team never got off the bus there for that Buffalo game. He goes 2 catches for 17 yards, which I don't even know how you do that at the wide receiver position. That's more like something for a fullback coming out of the backfield. 2 for 17. For Danimals Cannibals, you can't say a whole lot other than he barely made a qualification for the senior citizen discount, scoring his 65 points. Tony Romo and Andre Johnson showed up. I guess you could say that. Romo went for over 300 and a couple of TDs in that game against the Jets, which in New York, that was really impressive for most of us Tony Romo owners out there. We're pretty excited about the future. He does still manage to find a way to get you that fumble and that interception, though, to take 4 points off the board, which is unfortunate, but that's part of Romo's game. The Andre Johnson thing, again, Houston versus Indy. The game was over before it even started, really. But by halftime, it was an insurmountable deficit. By halftime, I believe Andre Johnson had 89 yards receiving and a touchdown. In the second half, he gets 1 catch for 6 yards, and it ends with 95 yards and a touchdown. So you miss out on some Andre Johnson there in that game being the way it was. And of course, everybody knows for the Cannibals, it's Arian Foster. If he plays, it's one thing. If he doesn't play, it's a whole different team. So Arian looks to maybe be back for week 2. He missed week 1. The Cannibals are forced to put the likes of Marshawn Lynch in there, which even as a #1 running back with no place to run, it doesn't really matter. So he just can't muster the points without the top guys playing. Jermichael Finley was disappointing, 5 points. In order for Cannibals to be competitive, Jermichael Finley has got to produce like a wide receiver based on where he was drafted and based on, frankly, what he did last year and what he's projected to do this year. But then again, the game for the Packers was over early, at least in the mindset of the Packers. They shut that offense down big time in the second half, and I think that cost Finley pretty big also. And then, we got to talk about this one. Bonehead move of the week. Kansas City Chiefs defense gets a start for somebody against the Bills. Maybe on paper initially that didn't seem like a bad idea, but you get -1 points when originally we had the Houston Texans defense in against the Colts for this Cannibals team. late last second change before kickoff, and it cost them. I think Houston's defense scored something like 17 points. You guys can text me or send me what the real score was, but there was a big swing there. Not that it made a difference as far as the overall scheme of things, but it goes back to overthinking stuff and paying way too much time reading the likes of ESPN.com so-called fantasy gurus. Frankly, we're all gurus if we're in this league. You got to go with what you know, and if it fails, it fails. If it goes well, good on you. But you spend too much time reading these friggin' sites like ESPN and all these other ones. More often than not, at least in my opinion, it ends up costing you. Okay, so that was Danimals Cannibals game. Wasn't really a game. Again, 135-65 Rattlers prevails. For next week, Rattlers, who's undefeated obviously after one game, is taking on the Geek Masters, another team that's also undefeated. One of our top games to watch next week as they battle to stay undefeated and to stay up top on that Great Lakes division. You want to keep up with the Buffalo Bills if at all possible. Things to look at for next week. At the moment, the Rattlers roster includes a start from Ben Tate out in Houston. That may or may not be a great move. He was very impressive last week starting for Foster. Actually, he didn't even start. Derek Ward did, but we all knew that was just a facade. Ward gets his 13 carries, and then Tate comes in and does the rest of the work. Now, how much work Tate actually gets in week 2, again, great matchup against that Miami defense we talked about earlier, but really it just depends on Foster's status. Because, Foster, he could start, but Foster could run the ball once, 5 times, 25 times. You don't know. As soon as he feels something in that hamstring that's not great, he's sitting down, and Ben Tate's going to be going crazy because Derek Ward twisted his ankle in the game in week 1. So it's Tate's show if Foster can't go. You got Percy Harvin starting too this week, who was on the bench last week. He's starting against Tampa. Detroit carved up the Tampa Bay secondary. Whether or not that continues is hard to say. The game's in Minnesota. It's a fast track. Harvin's got special teams upside. He returns kicks and punts. But there's a lot of questions right now about Donovan McNabb and whether or not the guy can still play NFL football. To go for 30-some yards passing last week against San Diego, I'm sorry, but that is just really pathetic. One thing that jumped out at me on Rattlers lineup for coming up here against Geekmaster, that Pettigrew matchup against KC. Chandler for Buffalo went bananas against the Kansas City defense. There's no reason to think Pettigrew won't. Pettigrew had a decent game against Tampa. There's room to run around in the middle of that KC defense. I think really anywhere on the field when you play against KC, there's room to run. Pettigrew could have a very big game. And then that Jets defense is going against Jacksonville. You've got to like that, what's going on there, because Jacksonville, whether they're starting McCown or Gabbard, or if they want to dust Byron Leftwich off, it doesn't matter because Jacksonville's team's a little bit sketchy. I know they won in week 1. It was against Tennessee. I don't think that's saying a whole lot at this point. You got to like that Jets matchup against Jacksonville. And then, Dwayne Bowe. Dwayne Bowe makes his way to the bench right now because of the fact that he had a bad game against Kansas City. But like I mentioned before, is it time to start abandoning these top-tier players because of a bad game? Dwayne Bowe was among the leaders in fantasy points last year. He was up and down. I'll give you that, okay? But no preseason, no off-season workouts. Dwayne Bowe and most of the KC starters were held out of almost every bit of the preseason games. They played the first couple of series in every game. They barely broke a sweat. They barely got the reps. You can fault the coaching staff for that. But I don't think Dwayne Bowe's real ability was shown this past Sunday. I think that game was, again, it was over before it started and never really had a chance to get him in a flow or in a rhythm. So I don't know if you sit him down there for Harvin, but again, we talked about the upside for Harvin, so that's where your own personal fantasy management comes into play. I just wanted to mention that we should take a look at that Dwayne Bowe matchup for this week. And then, of course, for the Cannibals, now he's 0-1. He's going to be taking on Lightning, who's also 0-1. So, ironically, we got the two guys that were ranked 1 and 2, respectively, in the preseason rankings, now flipped over down at the bottom of the preseason rankings, and they're battling against each other. Now, Lightning had a pretty good game in Week 1, scoring over 110 points, barely getting edged out by that Geekmaster squad when Darren McFadden did what he did, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So he had a great game. He's got Sebastian Janikowski kicking 9-point field goals. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that and have to take a loss. So he's got a little bit more positive feeling going into this Week 2 matchup than this Cannibals team who ties for the lowest points output in the first week. So for Danimals Cannibals here, you don't want to go 0-2. We just talked about that. You just don't want to start off at the bottom of the heap at the beginning of the year and have to battle your way back. Once you start getting into bye weeks, you want to have some wins under your belt before these bye weeks start in case you got to take one on the chin. looking at his lineups again, Arian Foster practiced Wednesday, looking like he's going to play, but there's a lot of time between now and Sunday to make a decision on that. They're playing against Miami. Great matchup. Again, we don't know how that hammy's going to do. He could run the ball once, twice, 25 times. That hamstring tweaks. Arian Foster's down, and then maybe he's down for another week or 2 or 3 or half the season, to the point where it doesn't matter, and a first-round pick is blown circa 2004 with Ricky Williams and the marijuana retirement thing. So, Danimals Cannibal is no stranger to blowing a first-round pick. You got LeGarrette Blount playing against Minnesota. Blount last week, just to be blunt, didn't really even play. He had 5 carries for 15 yards, which this guy's supposed to be a featured back. He was supposed to be the only thing the Bucs had in the running game. This young kid, great season last year, missed all these games, still rushed for over 1,000. And frankly, you can't say that Blount looked bad on this past Sunday. He barely saw the field, and he's been openly complaining in the media about it. And the coach for the Bucs, Raheem Morris, has come out and said he's right. We need to get him more involved. So we'll see if that holds true. If they fall behind, though, again, like they did against Detroit, you won't see Blount, because Blount's not as experienced as Ernest Graham in pass protection and catching out of the backfield. They don't have time to mess around if they're down a touchdown or 2 at the beginning of the game against Minnesota, because again, the Bucs are 0-1. They can't afford to go to 0-2 in the real NFL. Other things to look at on Danimals' lineup here for next week. Right now we got Brandon Lloyd in the starting lineup, but there's injury concern there, as he played on Monday night a little bit more in a limited role because of a groin injury. We don't know how long that's going to go on. Again, will Jermichael Finley show up against Carolina? You would think so, based on what Arizona did to Carolina in Week 1. You'd think that it's going to be more of the same passing game for the Packers, but Finley was big in the first half against the Saints Thursday, didn't touch the ball in the second half, so you just don't know what's going to go on. And then again, as far as fantasy defense goes, that Kansas City Chiefs team's already off of Danimals' line, or off of his roster, but if you look at what he's got now, he's got Atlanta versus Philly. And I forget the other one that he just picked one up off the waiver wire that's not really jumping out as far as a wow factor. A Washington Redskins defense going against Arizona. I mean, do you really want a piece of that? That's hard to say. It's in Washington, the game that is, but you don't know if that's a good matchup. And you certainly are not going to start the Atlanta Falcons defense against Mike Vick and the Eagles. I don't care what you think is going to happen in that one. I don't care that it's in Atlanta. That's a dome. It's a fast track. Vick's no stranger to that field, obviously. You don't want anything to do with that. So that's going to sum up the Cannibals-Rattlers game for Week 1 and then the upcoming stuff for them. Moving on to our third game to recap here, we had Lightning taking on Geek Masters. This was the closest game of the week, maybe the best as far as competitive juices flowing, and being up late on Monday watching that one finish off. That was a real buzzer beater there, as Geek Masters pulls it out 119-14 on the back of Darren McFadden's 22 carries for $150 in that Monday night game against Denver. He really that actually sealed the deal, despite Sebastian Janikowski's surprise 17 fantasy points in the same game. So again, 119-114, Geek comes out on top. Big scorers for Geek were Drew Brees with 39 fantasy points. That comes from 419 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Again, we talked about McFadden already. And then you got Chris Beanie Wells, Miles Austin, and Mike Wallace all scoring 15 points or more for him. So again, nice to see Beanie Wells doing what we all kind of thought he would do, as Arizona gets rid of Hightower and then loses the kid they just drafted to a season-ending injury. Chris Wells becomes really the only thing they have, and the guy gets 18 carries for 90 yards and a touchdown. So pretty big game for him there. And then if you look at Lightning, his big producers in that 114 output were Phillip Rivers, obviously scoring 26. That's 335, 2 touchdowns. Unfortunately, 2 picks to go with that. Matt Forte, again, kind of what we thought was going to happen. He's starting to kind of come into his own now in this Mike Martz offense. I watched a little bit of that game that they had against Atlanta, and I saw, if I squinted real tight, it looked almost like some Marshall Faulk type plays that used to go down on The Greatest Show on Turf back in the early 2000s when Martz was in St. Louis. The swing pass out of the backfield, the screen that's set up from running the ball and being able to throw downfield, getting those defensive guys in that mindset of, we got to get some pressure on this quarterback, and they start going all out to get there, and you drop that screen pass off. It looked real similar to me as far as what we used to see from St. Louis, and Forte's the guy that can do that. He's not Marshall Faulk, don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but the kid can run, he can catch, he's really an all-around back. So he puts up 23. 68 yards rushing, 90 through the air, and a touchdown. So that was a big, big day out of Matt Forte. And then, of course, you look at Deshaun Jackson putting up 100 yards and a touchdown. Jason Witten has a 100-yard game for Dallas. And we already talked about Sebastian Janikowski's unbelievable 63-yard, 9-point field goal. As, again, Lightning goes for 114 points and falls just short of the Geek Masters, 119 to 114. In Week 2, the undefeated Geek Masters take on the undefeated Rattlers in a battle to stay unbeaten and stay on top of that Great Lakes division. Some matchup notes for Geek Masters we're looking at. We got Drew Brees playing against the Bears, which, doesn't necessarily sound awesome when you just say it, but think about this. It's in New Orleans. Brees just got done lighting up a pretty tough Packers defense in Green Bay. And the Bears probably going to be playing with no Brian Urlacher Sunday. I don't know if you guys heard, but his mom, died all of a sudden. I guess it was a real sudden and tragic thing. I don't know that she'd actually been sick. But it doesn't matter. We feel for the guy. Our prayers go out to him. But Urlacher is probably not going to play. And now you're taking a big piece of that Bears defense out of the middle of the field and just making it that much easier for Drew Brees to go off. And the Saints are fighting for their lives. As again, you can't go 0-2 and feel like you're in a good spot to make the playoffs in the NFL. And Drew Brees and the Saints are fighters, and they're not going to go down easily. We got Darren McFadden's playing against Buffalo. Now, I understand that Buffalo, 41-7, absolute bludgeoning of the Chiefs. I don't know how excited you get about that if you're a Bills fan. I don't know that you look at the fantasy matchups and say, wow, Jamal Charles didn't go for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns against Buffalo, so maybe they got some kind of a run defense. I don't know that you say that. Maybe you do. They could be on to something. I still think it's a great matchup for McFadden, though, going against Buffalo, just based on the way that he looked really dominant against Denver in that game on Monday. The wide receiver matchups for Geek Masters is interesting. You're looking at games where Miles Austin plays the 49ers, Mike Wallace plays against Seattle. Last week, Seattle played the 49ers. And that game really didn't do anything for me other than an excuse to get a nap in the mid-afternoon hours. It was terrible. And I don't think we learned a whole lot about either one of those teams, Seattle and San Fran that is, other than they're not very good, especially on offense. Neither one of them has much to speak of on offense. So I don't know what their defense is. Are their defenses really good? I forget what the final score of that game was. It ended up being like 33-16 because Ted Ginn went off on the return game. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot going on for San Fran or Seattle offensively. So because of it, I don't know what we actually know about San Francisco's defense or Seattle's defense. We have a pretty good idea about most of the teams in the NFC West and their defense being irrelevant, but we don't know for sure. So it's hard to say if those matchups are as good as they could be. Then we got the Giants defense taking on St. Louis, which this is another interesting one. Steven Jackson does the Steven Jackson thing and gets hurt immediately in the season, driving his owners crazy. However, we don't know if he's playing. We don't know if he's not. He's probably not going to. Cadillac Williams will play, whatever. Giants defense, though, a lot of holes in that defense because of injury. Justin Tuck maybe comes back, maybe does not come back. That's a big, big variable as far as pass rush is concerned. Their Giants are missing at least 2 of their top defensive backs. It shows. That game, I think against Washington, they made Grossman look a little less gross than he really is. I'm sorry. He had a great game. It's Rex Grossman. And you know what's going to happen eventually with Rex Grossman. It's going to get gross, man. I'm telling you. So I think that maybe was more of an indication that the Giants' defense is in trouble on the back end. It may not be a great play against St. Louis. And St. Louis doesn't scare me offensively. Sam Bradford's pretty sweet, but he doesn't really have the weapons yet on offense. This could be the week maybe you see Sims Walker get going. But again, I don't feel great about that Giants defense matchup for the Geek Masters. So again, those are just my opinions. And we'll move on now. From that game, we'll go to the Voodoo Heavy Hitters matchup. Heavy Hitters, a newcomer to our league this year, owned by Davin Anderson. He took on Voodoo, who was... a guy's been around for a long time, good old Mike Benson. Mike comes out on top, 93-84. Again, sub 100-point winner. It happens from time to time. And Voodoo will tell you right now that he left a lot on the field there, and a lot of his best guys didn't show up in the way that he would have expected them to. So he's looking for bigger things going forward, but he does get the win, and that's really the only thing that matters in this league. It doesn't matter. You want to talk about points scored and all that other stuff? That's great if you want to brag about having the points, but I think Killer Whales put it best about this league. It's about the titles. It's about the trophy. It's about saying that you won it, however, whatever means necessary. It doesn't have anything to do with how many points you did or didn't score in week 1 or 2 or whatever. It's where you are at the end of it. So Voodoo comes out on top, 93-84 over the newcomer heavy hitters. For Voodoo, Calvin Johnson looked very impressive. The guy's been inconsistent for ever since he's been in the league. Up and down, up 1 week, down another. Disappears for 3-4 weeks at a time. A lot of that had to do with Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford has been in and out of the lineup for the last number of years. The guy is kind of injury prone as far as quarterbacks go. And you see that Calvin Johnson's production is tied directly to Stafford. I think it's you can't argue it right now. He goes for 6 catches, 88 yards, and a couple of touchdown grabs against Tampa this past Sunday. He looks like he's poised to have a huge breakout season. Maurice Jones-Drew, 24 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown, gets to 15 points. The only thing about Maurice Jones-Drew you got to keep an eye on going forward is this Kareem kid they got backing him up. They're high on him. They're splitting carries a little bit more than I think you want to see from an MJD owner. But again, he gets 15 from MJD, and he gets 14 out of that Chargers defense, which is, against Chargers defense, was #1 defense last year statistically, and they're poised to do a lot of the same type of damage this year too. A couple other things to note: Jimmy Graham, the highly promoted, the highly hyped tight end for New Orleans, showed up there with 4 catches in a touchdown, 56 yards receiving for Voodoo. For heavy hitters, it was Joe Flacco. Heavy hitters, man, you got to keep in mind, he's the guy that drafted Peyton Manning. Nobody wanted to be that guy. Heavy hitters was that guy. Had to do it. Based on where he got him, he got good value. Too bad for him, that nerve thing in the neck, which was perceived to be insignificant, turned out to be sort of a problem, and we don't know if he'll come back. So he's facing a season with nothing for quarterback, but Joe Flacco on Sunday against the Steelers showed us he might be ready to come out of his shell a little bit and start doing some things. He puts up 26 points with 3 touchdown passes against the Steelers, which is not easy to do. I don't care who you are. Hakeem Nicks, 122 yards receiving in that game against Washington. That was nice to see. Des Bryant, very impressive game for him. He got hurt in the first half early on and was never the same after the game if you watched it. But he had a lot of targets in that game. He's going to be a big part of the Dallas passing game. So how you feel about the Dallas passing game is up to you, but Des Bryant's going to be a big part of it. And he put up 13 points to go with Hakeem Nicks' 17. And those were heavy hitters, big scorers there. He's got the Steelers defense out there too, who did a -3, but again, we talked earlier, that was kind of a statistical anomaly. I don't think you're going to see the same thing from the Steelers defense week in and week out. So again, 93-84, Voodoo wins. Voodoo goes to 1-0. He's taking on that juggernaut Buffalo team in week 2, which nobody at this point is going to be excited to see on their schedule. He does have some matchup issues. I think MJD, we talked about the carry sharing with Kareem right now in Jacksonville. He's playing against the Jets. That's not a great matchup for a running game. Adrian Peterson, though, playing against Tampa Bay. The Lions beat Tampa last week, mostly throwing the ball because they could. They didn't run Javid Best all over the field, but I'm going to tell you right now, they probably could have. I saw a lot of open space in that running game if they would have stuck with it. That just wasn't their MO on Sunday. I think you could see Adrian Peterson at home in Minnesota really get loose. As a good friend of mine would say it, he's just going to get loose. We got Calvin Johnson playing against Kansas City for Voodoo. That could single-handedly take down the Buffalo Bills. You may see a Wes Welker-like performance from Calvin Johnson this week going against that Kansas City team. Mike Williams for the Bucs playing against Minnesota. Look at what San Diego did to Minnesota last week. You may not, in years past, we don't look at the Minnesota defense on paper and say, I like my fantasy matchups against Minnesota. That was never the case. They had a great front four against the run. They had a good. They put pressure on the quarterback through many different ways. Their secondary was tight on the backside. They had a tough defense. Now, though, you look at Minnesota as a team that you can move the ball on. San Diego, Phillip Rivers carved them up over 300 yards, multiple touchdown passes. You got to feel pretty good about a Mike Williams for Tampa running around in that secondary. He's the #1 guy. He didn't have a great game last week, 50 yards and a touchdown for Voodoo, but still, that game against Detroit for Tampa was just really out of whack from the start, and it didn't really allow them to get into their routine. They didn't run the ball, they couldn't get the balance, which is what they live on, is a balanced attack. They're not spread the field and throw 55 times a game. Believe it or not, even though they have Josh Freeman, Mike Williams, Kellen Winslow, They got LeGarrette Blount for a reason. The kid can run the ball. They need balance to be at their top form. That's where Mike Williams is going to start getting loose. I think if you can see them kind of control the ball early and let that develop, okay? So it could be a great matchup for Voodoo. And then he's got that Detroit defense, which you got to laugh because for the last, I don't know, feels like 15 years, you look at Detroit Lions on who your guys are going against as far as fantasy players. If you see like an at Detroit or a versus Detroit, you're going, yes, there's 20 points right there for that guy. You're feeling great about it. But now you really can't say that. And I realize it's only been a week. But what they showed this past Sunday in Tampa against a team that's pretty talented is that they've got a defense, especially that line. Vanden Bosch and Ndamukong Suh. They may or may not have that Nick Fairley kid they drafted out of Auburn back up front. You put those guys on the field, that is one hell of a front four. They're going to get pressure on the quarterback with those guys. They're built to wreak havoc on your team from a pass rush standpoint and just being able to stop the run too. They were real tough against the Bucs last week. I think it's a pretty good play. Detroit versus KC. We talked about KC maybe having some hangover from limited reps in the preseason. No offseason for anybody we talked about. But KC was particularly tight as far as letting starters play in the preseason this year. And I think it showed last week against Buffalo. And I think it's going to continue to show for at least another week or two as these starters get their groove going, okay? KC's a talented team, but I really think that Detroit defense is a sweet play against them. Then for heavy hitters next week, as he's 0-1, he's taking on Big Dog as we keep it all in the family there. Big Dog, he lost in week 1 also, so you got two guys at 0-1 battling to stay out of that 0-2 hole. We've mentioned it many times. These guys are divisional rivals. You don't want to get into that fight club and start off with that kind of hole. You don't want to dig out of that. So that's a big pivotal matchup there. For heavy hitters, I really, really like what I see with that Ahmad Bradshaw matchup going against St. Louis. Again, you saw McCoy was able to get loose against that St. Louis defense. Ahmad Bradshaw, I think, is poised to have a big game. Jamal Charles, we just got done talking about Detroit. Jamal Charles is a stud. He's a top-flight running back. You have to start him every week if he's healthy because of who he is. You just might have to take it on the chin this week as far as Jamal Charles finding room to run against that Detroit defense. Hakeem Nicks and Dez Bryant we talked about, but those guys are coming off of some injuries, albeit them minor. If you read the stuff online right now, it's looking good for both of those guys to play. Hakeem Nicks, I want to say, was something to do with his knee. And Dez Bryant had some type of a hip or quadricep injury in that game last week against the Jets. Again, both are looking like they're going to play. They practiced limited amounts on Wednesday, but they are out on the field, and they're both saying, at least to the media, that they're going to go. And then he's got Dallas Clark for a tight end, that's a top-tier tight end. Last week he went for 4 grabs, 39 yards in the disgusting matchup against Houston. And I feel like as long as Peyton Manning's out, your Dallas Clark value isn't going to be there the way you like. It's not going to be something that you're excited about looking at. The Steelers' defense is playing against Seattle. Steelers' defense, -3 last week against Baltimore. Okay, I'll give you that. How much stock do you want to put into 1 week? That's up to you. Seattle looks bad on offense. Tavares Jackson is as bad as we thought he was when he played for Minnesota. He got to Seattle, stayed with that offensive coordinator, Bevel, that Seattle grabbed out of Minnesota. It doesn't matter. Sidney Rice is still probably not going to play this week, so they're down a number 1 receiver, and they just don't have that offensive line clicking on all gears yet, despite the fact that they brought Tom Cable in as an O-line coach, which for the Raiders, you saw Cable changed everything for the Raiders by bringing them back to a 500 record last year, and they ran the ball like a son of a bitch last year, the Raiders, that is. But Tom Cable isn't out there playing, and Seattle looks pathetic. You could see that Steelers defense go for 20-plus points in this coming week. So those are the matchups for those guys. In our final game to talk about, it was Big Dog versus Killer Whales. Killer Whales comes out on top, 86-74. Our low-scoring winner of the week goes to Killer Whales. Doesn't matter, because if you know Killer Whales, you know that guy is around the top of the league and has been for at least 2 of the last 3 years. The guy's tough. The guy's talented, and he knows his stuff. Again, 86-74, Killer Whales on top over the Big Dog. For Killer Whales, man, it was one guy. It was Aaron Rodgers. 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and that's what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. That's a number 1 pick in the draft. That's why he was. That's why he's always going to be, as long as he's playing for the Packers and as long as he's healthy. After that, nice output from Tim Hightower. You got 15 points out of Hightower, 72 on the ground, 25 yards through the air, puts in a touchdown against the Giants. And Hightower, again, a guy that was high on my list at the beginning of the year as far as, a guy that I wanted to get on my team as a sleeper for that Washington team, just because, again, it's that whole what do you want to say? The process of elimination, I think, is the term. They didn't really have anybody else. Ryan Terrain, they like him a lot. He's banged up. Tim Hightower's the guy for the Washington Redskins, at least at this point in the season, and he puts up a decent 15-point output. Didn't get a whole lot else going, but it was enough to beat the big dog. For big dog, it was Mike Vick. That was his guy. 26 fantasy points, and there was a lot more to be had, as Vick goes for only $187 through the air and a couple of touchdown passes, completing well under 50% of his passes, which is kind of a sad thing to see. But he did have 10 carries for 98 yards on the ground. Fumbled the ball, I'll give you that, but still, you have a quarterback that's going to rush for numbers that you see from a running back. And if you play the defense to take that away, like so many try to do, the guy has shown us, at least last year, that he'll beat you with his arm just as much as he will with his feet. So you're either going to get old school Vic running all over you for 100-plus yards a game, or you're going to fight so hard to stop that by cage rushing him, keeping him in the pocket. He's going to carve you up because they still have Jackson, they still have Macklin, they still have McCoy, they've got Selleck out there running around, they've got a lot of weaponry. Don't forget, they also have Steve Smith from the Giants last year. The guy's a tough possession receiver playing in that 3 slot with Avant, you know what I'm saying? The Eagles have a lot of weapons, so you let them run on you, Vic I'm talking about, or the guy's going to throw. The Eagles are going to be tough to beat this year, no matter who's playing them. And if you got Mike Vick on your team, you're more often than not going to be smiling come the end of the weekend. After that, it was Brandon Marshall, 7 catches for $139. No surprise there, as Brandon Marshall is looking to be that workhorse receiver for the Dolphins this year. And then after that, there wasn't a whole lot else going on. Peyton Hillis was a bit of a letdown. No Sean Moreno was ridiculously sad. 22 yards on the ground, 35 through the air with a fumble. Putting up 3 points is just not going to get the job done. And that was the week that was for the big dog. Now going into next week, Killer Whales undefeated. He's taking on the Silver Bullets. Championship rematch from last year. We talked about that. Silver Bullets edged them out. For Killer Whales, man, it's Aaron Rodgers versus anyone at this point. Happens to be Carolina this week, that's a scary thought if you're playing against Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers versus anyone, I don't care if it's the Ravens or the Panthers, that cat's going to go off. He's going to put up at least 25 fantasy points every week, I'll bet you. Tim Hightower playing against the Arizona Cardinals this week is looking real nice. Guys playing against the former team, the team that thought they didn't need him anymore. That's always motivation. If you talk to any of these guys, you listen to them in the media, that's what they talk about. That's what they're twittering. That's what they're tweeting. That's what they say. Want to play my old team, want to play my old team, kick my old team's ass. We got Vincent Jackson taking on New England. Vincent Jackson, very disappointing last game. 2 catches only for 30 yards. I'm telling you right now, I don't think you're going to see a repeat performance. That New England defense is suspect as hell. Weak in the secondary, and they gave up almost 400 yards passing to Miami. So, say what you will about New England, but that defense is suspect, and Vincent Jackson is poised to, get loose. We got Evan Moore starting, kind of a surprise start at tight end. Evan Moore for Cleveland is going to start. It's against Indy, so it's actually kind of a smart move because Indy is looking to be down a couple more guys on defense. No Peyton Manning, no Gary Brackett. I think there's another linebacker. If you check the stats on the ESPN as far as injuries go, the Colts have a couple of key guys out on defense. I know Gary Brackett's one of them, and that's a big part of their linebacker core. So Evan Moore's looking like a pretty smart play. He had 6 targets against Cincinnati, so not a terrible move there. And he did score a touchdown with his 60 yards. So pretty good play, Evan Moore versus Indy. For Big Dog next week, he's 0-1, taking on the heavy hitters. We talked about that already, staying out of that 0-2 hole. He's got Mike Vick taking on his old team. Need we say more? You know what I mean? He's battling the ghost of the dog killer. So he's going to go out there and he's going to want to get loose for sure in his old stadium on that AstroTurf. You got to love that Mike Vick play. Peyton Hillis versus Indianapolis. That's probably one of the best running back matchups in the entire NFL this year from a fantasy standpoint. Not this year, but this week. Peyton Hillis versus Indy is probably going to be $150 and a couple of touchdowns. Should be anyway. Dallas defense is playing San Fran. We talked about how pathetic San Francisco's offense was last week. Dallas's defense seems like every year after year they're banged up in the secondary, but they get pass rush with DeMarcus Ware and company. That's going to probably be a pretty solid play. Again, San Fran looking real weak. And then in a move that I'm kind of happy to see, Noshawn Moreno finds his way to the big dog bench for Reggie Bush. Say what you will about Reggie Bush. They've surely been doing it in the media. He's not an in-between-the-tackles runner. Okay, fine. You're not telling us anything we don't know. He wanted to go to Miami and be the guy. He could not be the guy in New Orleans because they had a lot of guys around him because he was too fragile. Okay, fine. Will he ever be the guy? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I say 50-50 chance. Right now, he can't run between the tackles. What's Miami doing between the tackles to make it easy to run, no matter who you are, first of all? Secondly, who cares? He catches the ball. He's got the speed to get to the outside. And I'm sorry, that is good enough to put up fantasy points. He scored 13 last week, 14, in the game against New England, which was mostly them throwing the ball anyway because they were fighting to stay with Brady. Okay, so I think Reggie Bush is a great play this week as Miami takes on Houston. And I'm not drinking the Houston Kool-Aid. I like the guys they got on offense. I got a couple of them on my team, obviously, but I still feel like even with Wade Phillips as a coordinator, Houston's defense is not their strong suit. They looked great last week against a Peyton Manningless Indianapolis team. Watch how good the Browns probably end up looking this week against the same team. That's all I'm going to say. Houston's defense, a lot of question marks. I feel like Miami showed that they can move the ball last week. I think Reggie Bush can have a big game. If it's not running between the tackles, you don't get extra bonus points in fantasy for running between the tackles. You get them for running for yards, scoring touchdowns, catching passes, and that's what it's all about. All right, so those are the recaps of the games for Week 1, guys. Again, I appreciate your time. I'm glad you stuck around to join us for the NFFL today. Again, I do appreciate I definitely appreciate feedback from the owners in our league. If you have anything to give that you know in terms of things maybe that I'm not covering, if you feel like I'm missing details about games or stats or whatever, again, I appreciate the criticism. I welcome the feedback. Again, thanks for watching, guys. I'll check in with you soon, and again, I'm going to do this every week as much as possible. So thanks for watching, man. Take it easy.